As is often the case, men want to marry beautiful women, while women want to marry wealthy men. In today's world, people sometimes value money more than human life. But is that true for today's story? Welcome back to Crime Documentary Files. On the morning of February 7, 2013, an Asian woman named Wang was waiting for her friend Novy to join her for coffee and a chat. However, Novy never showed up, and her phone was unreachable, which made Ms. Wang very worried. So she decided to go to Novy's house to check on her. When she arrived, she encountered a white man in his early 70s who introduced himself as John Chardon, Novy's husband. John told Ms. Wang that his wife had left the house that morning, which made Ms. Wang very suspicious. Even stranger, there were 2 women in their 30s in the house. When asked, John explained that they were his daughters from a previous marriage. While the explanation seemed reasonable, Ms. Wang still felt uneasy. How could someone who was cheerful and had dinner the previous evening, even making plans to meet for coffee the next day, suddenly leave? Furthermore, Novy had 2 young children and a beauty salon, making her sudden departure very questionable. Thinking quickly, Ms. Wang made up an excuse to enter the house and take a look around. Having visited several times before, she was familiar with the layout of her friend's home. She noticed that the carpet in John and his wife's bedroom was strangely wet, and a long rug was missing. John explained that he had just used a carpet cleaner that morning, which accounted for what Ms. Wang observed. However, she still felt uneasy. So, she decided to call the police. When the police arrived, they only found John. His 2 daughters had already left. From John's statements, the police learned that his wife, Novy, was from Indonesia. After marrying John, they lived together in Upper Kumra, north of Gold Coast. John stated that when he woke up at 6 a.m. that morning, he heard his wife mention going out, but being half asleep, he didn't remember where she said she was going. John recounted that during their conversation earlier that day, Novy seemed very out of control. He even hinted that she might have sold her jewelry worth 70,000 AUD to get some cash. He recalled in frustration, she should hurry up and bring her foolish head home rather than wandering the streets. But he also said that he was very worried about his wife's safety. When asked by the police if he had done anything harmful to his wife, John emphasized that he was a philanthropist who had helped many poor families in the Philippines. He firmly stated that he had no idea where his wife had gone, did not know what had happened to her, and had never done anything to harm her. However, the next day, John took his and Novy's 2 children, aged 7 and 9, and flew to Indonesia. When contacted by the police, John said he had to travel for work and that his plane tickets had been booked in advance and he wouldn't be back for 2 weeks. With his wife missing and the police investigating, his decision to travel for business only increased their suspicions about him. However, the police had no grounds to arrest him since they were still unsure whether the missing person was alive or dead. Therefore, the most critical task at that moment was to find Novy. The police reviewed surveillance footage from the surrounding area multiple times. They noted that the night before Novy's disappearance, a camera at a gas station captured her on video. She was driving a dark blue Volvo. Around 11 p.m., neighbors still saw her at her home. From that point until the following morning, no one saw her again. Novy seemed to have vanished without a trace. Consequently, the police sealed off the house as a crime scene and conducted a thorough search of the entire property. They discovered a urine stain on the bedroom carpet, which was identified as Novy's. Other than that, there were no useful clues. There was no blood, no signs of a crime. Everything in the house was remarkably clean. 4 days later, on the afternoon of February 11th, investigators found Novy's car in the parking lot of a long-distance bus station. However, the station's surveillance cameras did not capture any footage of Novy. Her social media accounts had not been updated, and there had been no transactions on her bank cards. Thus, the police speculated that there was a possibility Novy had been murdered. Currently, the primary suspect remains her husband, John. Therefore, the police began examining the marital relationship between John and the victim to identify any potential motives for the crime. John Chardon owned 2 factories near the Gold Coast that produced industrial lubricants, along with an investment project in mining, and a company he founded with his first wife in 1986, in which he held a 50% stake. John's total assets were estimated to be around 7 million AUD. Before marrying Novy, John had been divorced 5 times. In 2000, John met Novy in Indonesia. Born in 1975, Novy was 32 years younger than John. She lived on the island of Java, Indonesia, and had never left the country, although she had always dreamed of seeing the world. When they met, John was 57 years old and Novy was 25. At that time, John's assets were valued at 2.2 million AUD, a sum that Novy could never have imagined. John was very fond of Novy, a young and beautiful woman. He began pursuing her passionately. Novy looked at John with admiration, and after less than a month of dating, they registered their marriage. Although she was John's 6th wife, Novy didn't mind and even believed she had found true love. After getting married, Novy moved with John to Queensland, where they began a very sweet and happy married life. Novy gave birth to 2 children, turning their world into a happy family of 4. Despite settling in Australia, Novy frequently returned to Indonesia to spend time with her family and friends. To her relatives and friends, she embodied the ideal of a wealthy wife, admired by everyone. However, by 2009, conflicts began to emerge between the couple. John started to show signs of being an abusive husband. He frequently beat Novy and even had a mistress from the Philippines. Novy later discovered that John often visited illicit entertainment venues whenever he traveled to the US. These issues led to frequent arguments between them. After numerous fights, their feelings for each other were no longer the same. To fill the void of loneliness, Novy also found herself a boyfriend. Both understood that their marriage was no longer faithful, but for the sake of their 2 children, they continued to live under the same roof. About a year before Novy's disappearance, the couple began living separately, but still shared the same house. Following their marital crisis, Novy started to become more independent. She opened a beauty salon in Australia, establishing her own business. This allowed her to support herself despite their separation. Just over 2 months before the incident, during Christmas 2012, John and Novy had a heated argument. Novy felt she could no longer endure such a life, but feared that John would take their 2 children away. According to the investigation, Novy sought advice from a lawyer. The lawyer informed her that Australian law strongly protects the rights of children and women. In the event of a divorce, the wife is entitled to half of the assets. This advice strengthened Novy's resolve to get a divorce, and she finally decided to propose it to John. The day before Novy disappeared, John had just received a letter from Novy's lawyer. The letter stated that Novy wanted 50% of John's assets, which amounted to approximately 3.5 million AUD, and that after the divorce they would share custody and jointly raise their 2 children. That evening, Novy and Ms. Wang had dinner at a restaurant until 11 p.m. before returning home. After that, Novy mysteriously vanished. After Novy's disappearance, the police continued their efforts to find her, but their efforts yielded no results. More than 3 years after the incident, the police received information from neighbors. A neighbor named Rachel Willie revealed that 2 years prior, Novy had traveled to the US. But before leaving, she told Rachel that if she did not return from the trip, it was likely because John had killed her or hired someone to do so. Novy instructed Rachel to contact the police if she did not return. However, after that trip, Novy never mentioned anything similar to Rachel again. Just before Novy went missing, Rachel called her. At that time, Novy was picking up her children from school and told Rachel about her impending divorce from John. Over the phone, she calmly stated that everything was over and that the divorce would be finalized that day. The only remaining issue was her business affairs. That evening, when John returned home, he drove into his garage at high speed. In doing so, he crashed into the garage door, creating a loud noise that caught the neighbor's attention. Another neighbor reported that he and his girlfriend heard noises that sounded like gunshots that night. However, no other neighbors heard similar sounds. The police then investigated John's factory and interviewed the workers. One worker mentioned that a few months before Novy's disappearance, he stumbled upon a box at the factory labeled with John's name. Out of curiosity, he opened it and found a gun and some bullets inside, though he did not recognize the type of gun. Another worker reported seeing John drive to the factory on the night of the incident. However, the car only stayed for a few minutes before leaving. This raised the question, why did John rush to the factory that night? A different employee recalled receiving a phone call after Novy's disappearance from someone claiming to be John's daughter, asking him to retrieve a box from the house and deliver it to another one of John's daughters. This was the same box his colleague had discovered earlier. These two daughters were John's children from a previous marriage and were in their 30s, the same women Ms. Wang had seen at John's house. When questioned, the elder daughter, 34-year-old Candy, stated that her father, John, had given her the box and instructed her not to open it. She had never opened it, assuming it contained some important components and items. Feeling uneasy, she asked someone to deliver the box to her sister, Angela. Eventually, a friend of Angela's hid the box. The police asked Candy if her father had given her the box on the morning after Novy's disappearance, but Candy denied this. However, she admitted that she and her sister had indeed been at their father's house the morning after Novy went missing. Throughout the investigation, the police believed that if Novy was killed at the house, it would have been very difficult for John, at the age of 66, to move the body and clean up the house by himself unless he had help. So, could his two daughters have assisted him? In 2014, the police discovered that John and Novy had previously lived in another villa on the Gold Coast, located in the Newton area. This house was quite secluded and had been excavated and repaired multiple times. 1 year after the incident, the investigative team suspected that this location might hold clues, so they brought in digging equipment and excavated 4 meters deep in the yard. They found 2 cars, a white Ford F-100 and a black Nissan Navara. But why did John bury these 2 cars? On March 13, 2014, the Australian police issued a public reward of 250,000 AUD for anyone who could provide valuable clues about Novy's disappearance. This reward led to numerous tip-offs from the public. One witness reported that around 10 a.m. on February 10th, the day before Novy's car was discovered, they saw the car at the bus station. There were some clothes scattered around the car and an older woman standing nearby looking worried. Across from Novy's car was a white Ford with a short, overweight, bald man and a young woman trying to start the car. The witness mentioned that the scene looked very suspicious, particularly with the clothes scattered around. Subsequently, the police discovered through surveillance footage that the white Ford seen at the bus station that day was one of the 2 cars unearthed from the villa. So, was the bald man the witness saw John? And were the 2 women his daughters? On January 28, 2015, a search team consisting of 50 volunteers conducted a search and excavation near another property of John's in a rural area, covering a total search area of 3.6 hectares, but they found nothing suspicious. By June 17, 2016, after 3 years of investigation, the police had collected 200 witness statements and finally had enough circumstantial evidence to arrest John and charge him with murder. However, moving from an indictment to a conviction was still a long journey. As the investigation continued, people began to uncover the dark side of the seemingly charitable man, revealing him to be a depraved, perverse individual. The police discovered that in the 1990s, John had a criminal record and had been convicted of child sexual abuse. After being detained, John continuously denied killing his wife. The police made a covert arrangement with Peter Ford, one of John's cellmates, to act as an informant. A seasoned con artist and money launderer with over 15 years of experience, Peter agreed to obtain a confession from John in exchange for a reduced sentence. Peter testified in court that on the night of March 31, 2015, John had a mental breakdown in his cell and confessed to him about killing Novy. John said he used the weapon in the mysterious box to kill Novy and dismembered her body. After 8 p.m., he took Novy's body to Southport, Queensland, and dumped her into the sea to avoid detection by fishermen. John even tied weights to Novy's body and punctured her stomach so that the gases wouldn't cause her body to float. He did this because he didn't want Novy to receive half of his assets. John also used ammonia to thoroughly clean the room and carpet to ensure no DNA or forensic evidence was left behind. However, John's lawyer argued that Peter's testimony in court did not match the initial case records, suggesting that he might have lied. Although Peter adamantly denied this, his solitary testimony was indeed insufficient to completely convince the jury. Was there more to this case than met the eye? Just when it seemed the case had hit a dead end, a man from the Philippines agreed to testify. This man, named Maso, stated that he and John met on a dating app and had been lovers since 1998. John began sponsoring poor families in the Philippines, including funding some impoverished students to attend university. However, John demanded that these students fulfill his sexual desires as a form of repayment. In return, he would provide additional support, such as repairing their homes and supplying food. John told the judge that this wasn't perverse, but just his unique way of loving someone else. In 2011, John met Maso on a dating platform. Early in 2012, they met at a hotel in the Philippines. John asked Maso if he could kill someone. Although Maso was a bit surprised, he tried to stay calm. He asked, "Who do you want to kill?" John replied, "I want to kill my wife," and added that if Maso couldn't do it, he could help find a hitman to kill Novy. He even offered to pay $10,000 to have his wife killed discreetly. Maso then told John he would find a way to hire a hitman, but in reality, Maso didn't know anyone and had no idea where to start. John seemed to believe him and urged Maso to act quickly when Novy went to Thailand for cosmetic surgery. In an email, John described his wife as despicable, cold, selfish, and greedy. He claimed she neglected their children and was having an affair. If they divorced, John couldn't bear to see his wife and her boyfriend become wealthy, and most of all, he didn't want to share his assets. In April 2012, John transferred $2,500 to Maso. Maso replied that they just needed to wait until John was present, and then they could proceed. At this point, John was convinced that Maso was working for him and had found a hitman, but in reality, Maso was just looking to extort money from him. After discovering Maso's extortion attempt, John still transferred an additional $20,000. By July 2012, John sent an email stating that due to personal reasons, he could no longer send money abroad. After that, their transactions ceased. Facing Maso's testimony in court, John defended himself by claiming he had asked Maso to find someone because he needed a bodyguard. He argued that he often visited places like Mindanao, which had many white gangs, and he didn't dare go without protection. As for purchasing weapons, he claimed it was solely for self-defense. Ultimately, after hearing testimony from over 70 witnesses, the jury concluded that before her disappearance, Novy had been threatened by her husband and possibly subjected to emotional and psychological abuse in the relationship. The prosecutor argued that on the night of Novy's disappearance, a fatal act occurred in the bedroom, carried out in silence, so as not to alarm the two young children. However, due to the lack of direct evidence of the murder on September 9, 2019, the Queensland Supreme Court could only convict John of manslaughter and sentenced him to 15 years in prison. However, he only served 1 year before dying of heart disease. At that time, John was 73 years old, and Novy, if still alive, would have been 35. Dear viewers, some believe that marrying a wealthy husband is a great fortune, but fate often finds ways to challenge us. Like Novy in this story, who, in her haste, ended up choosing the wrong husband, leading to a tragically grim fate. And John, who was always trying to hold on to his wealth, ultimately couldn't keep it. Indeed, greed is the most terrifying thing that can destroy a person. That concludes today's episode of Crime Documentary Files. What have you taken away from this video? Don't forget to share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Goodbye, and see you next time.